It was November 4th, 2016, just after 3 in the morning, when someone on Forshan asked a simple question. Anyone here ever have a paranormal experience that has really shaken them? Like made you change your entire worldview? What followed was a collection of stories that would make anyone question what they thought they knew about reality. These weren't just ghost stories or urban legends. These were personal experiences from people who had seen things that fundamentally changed how they viewed the world. The first response came a couple hours later. Someone started their story with a location: Lake Okeechobee, Florida, the 7th largest body of fresh water in the United States. Fishermen used to, and still end up pulling up large amounts of human remains from the lake. It's thought to be a burial ground used by the Seminoles and other Native Americans. But that's not the only reason the lake has a dark history. In 1928, a hurricane hit the area. The storm surge from the lake was 8 feet high and wiped out nearby communities. 2,500 people died. All of them were buried in a mass grave. There are lots of stories of hauntings in the area around the lake. 3 years before this post, the person and a few friends rented a boat to go fishing on the lake. It was nighttime with calm waters. They were strolling the deck, looking at the stars. Then they felt like they were being watched. They saw movement out of the corner of their eye over the water. Their first thought was that it might be a gator, but what they saw next froze them in place. A human skull was peeking out above the water. They locked eyes, or rather eye sockets, on each other. An immense sense of dread set in. Not just fear, dread. That deep, primal feeling that something is very wrong. They screamed at their buddies to wake up while running to draw the anchor and get out of there. They heard some splashing and almost had a heart attack while hoisting the anchor. Once it was done, they rushed to the helm and put full power to the engines. Their friends were still asleep through all of this. They got out of the area and coasted around slowly while keeping an eye out so as not to waste too much fuel. When morning came, their friends woke up and asked why they were 30 miles from where they had anchored. They made up an excuse about better fishing ground. They never told their friends what really happened because they didn't think anyone would believe them. They said they had never been so scared in their life. But the strangest thing wasn't just seeing the skull. It was the weird feeling they had to fight. The urge to jump into the water, like something was calling them, pulling them. They had to actively resist the compulsion to dive in after that skull. Think about that for a moment. Something in that lake, whether it was the skull itself or something else, was trying to lure them into the water, into a lake known for pulling up human remains. A lake where 2,500 people died in a single night. Another person shared their experience. They said they had strange fixations on certain things, which eventually came together in their mind into a person, or at least a character in their head with all sorts of characteristics that would just come to them. Kind of like how authors sometimes describe character formation. Then they would suddenly have moments of clarity where memories would seem to come to them. Not their memories, someone else's memories. And they would have apparently nonsense words appear in their mind. The words were hard to hold on to, but eventually they wrote some down. They decided to try and translate the words. And it turned out they were in Sumerian or Akkadian, ancient languages. Languages this person had never studied. The words described a goddess with the exact description they already had in their mind, a goddess they had somehow known about without ever learning about her. How does that happen? How do you receive memories and words in a dead language describing something you've already been visualizing? Someone else shared a story about a strange light. They and their friend had finished smoking marijuana and were about ready to leave when the spot they were standing on got illuminated. The person admitted the marijuana had an effect on their behavior that night because they weren't really concerned that there was a bright light shining on them. They just thought it was pretty annoying because it was so bright they couldn't see very well. But their friend was upset, and justifiably so. This light was shining out of nowhere in a dark sky and hitting them directly. There was no sound, and it was perfectly still. But it was so bright. What it seemed like most was a car's headlight, but it was clearly enormous, much bigger than any headlight. After maybe 30 seconds or a minute, the light just disappeared. Then they and their shaken friend walked back to the dorms. The person really wasn't concerned at the time, but admitted the whole thing was pretty odd. Thinking about it later, they supposed the light could have been on some kind of drone, but the light was too large. There was no sound at all, and the light was perfectly still. Even if some kind of high-quality stealth drone that was perfectly stable and unmoving was out there that night, that light was something else. Something that targeted them specifically. Something that found them in the dark and watched them for a full minute before disappearing without a trace. Then came a story that was particularly unsettling. A person who had epilepsy for about 7 years posted their experience. They were 25 years old at the time. Throughout those 7 years, they had multiple dreams that were like Final Destination. Not about people dying, but about people betraying them or lying to them. The dreams were random. For example, they were in a relationship for 4 years. It was the best relationship. They were never scared she would cheat. No arguments. No problems ever. No reason to be concerned about her at all. Then out of nowhere, they had this dream where she was cheating on them with some tattooed guy with black hair. Of course they weren't concerned because it was just a dream, but they still felt like they had to tell her to be sure. They told her about the dream and asked if they should worry. Her jaw dropped in that moment. They couldn't have known about the other guy. She had covered it up pretty good, and they trusted her, so they hadn't been spying on her or anything. She told them they had to talk. She said they needed a break. Then she broke up with them. They asked her 1,000 times if it was because of someone else. No, 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 she kept saying. One day after the breakup, a friend spotted her at a party, making out with a guy. They were tilted as hell. They looked for his Facebook. Big tattooed guy with black hair. And when they saw him, they knew immediately that it was exactly the one they had dreamed about. Exactly. Not similar. Not kind of like. Exactly the same person down to specific details they hadn't even mentioned. But it didn't stop there. They said they'd had several dreams like that, and in 100% of all cases, they were right. Every single time. They read a lot about epilepsy, and apparently they weren't the only one having these visions. Old Roman empires, for example, had people with epilepsy as their helpers. They would be asked about the outcome of wars, or who would be king. The person said it might be coincidence, but to be honest, the dreams were always 100%, like what happened in reality. It scared them badly, especially because they also dreamed about killing people, and it felt like they actually killed them while sleeping. They never knew when their dreams would come true, but they did, and they didn't want to end up in prison for something they dreamed before it happened. Think about what that means. If their dreams always came true, and they dreamed about killing someone, what happens next? Do they have free will to stop it? Or is it already determined? Are they seeing the future or creating it? Someone else brought up an interesting piece of folklore. The Native Americans believed their souls could be picked off their scalps and trapped in nightmares if they stumbled in certain places, most especially on staircases. So it was practice to never close your eyes while walking down a staircase or walking up a hill. That way, you could see yourself stumbling and catch yourself before your spirit slips. It's a strange belief, but when you think about it, cultures don't develop these kinds of specific taboos for no reason. Something must have happened to make them believe that stumbling on stairs could trap your soul. How many people had to experience something before it became a rule, passed down through generations? Another person shared a story about their brother. Their brother was 44 years old at the time of posting, and they were 33 when they were younger and lived under the same roof back before the internet. Their brother said a couple of times that some nights there was a black figure standing in front of the bed, staring at them. He described it best as a black glass disco ball, faced, bald, and naked, being with no distinctive gender. He was terrified of it, so terrified that he started doing martial arts and sleeping with knives he stole from the kitchen to somehow overcome it, to have some way to fight back against this thing that would just stand there and watch. It had been 10 years since the person last saw their brother. They thought about asking more details about it now that they were both grown-ups, but they felt reluctant since their brother was a minister now. Had the brother found religion because of what he saw? Was he trying to protect himself with faith? Or was he trying to find answers in Scripture about what that thing was? The question that started the thread was simple. Anyone ever have a paranormal experience that really shook them, that changed their entire worldview? And the answer from multiple people was yes. Absolutely yes. These weren't people looking for attention. They weren't writing creepypasta for entertainment. These were people sharing experiences they had carried with them for years, experiences they couldn't explain, experiences that made them question everything they thought they knew about reality. A skull in a lake that made someone want to jump in the water, ancient words in a dead language appearing in someone's mind, a light that watched from the sky, dreams that predicted betrayal with perfect accuracy, a black figure with a disco ball face standing over a child's bed. Each story was different, but they all had something in common. They all described a moment when the normal rules of reality seemed to break down, when something impossible happened and there was no rational explanation, when the world revealed itself to be stranger and more terrifying than anyone wanted to believe. The people who shared these stories weren't the same after their experiences. The person who saw the skull never went back to that lake. The person with the prophetic dreams lived in fear of what they might see next. The brother who saw the figure became a minister, possibly searching for protection or answers. These experiences didn't just scare them in the moment. They fundamentally changed how they viewed the world. Because once you see something that shouldn't exist, once you know something that you couldn't possibly know, once you feel something trying to pull you into dark water, you can't go back to believing the world is simple and safe and rational. You start looking over your shoulder. You start paying attention to dreams. You start wondering what else is out there that most people never see. You start questioning whether the reality we all agree on is actually the complete picture or just the parts we're comfortable acknowledging. And maybe that's the most unsettling thing about these stories. Not that they happened, but that they probably happen more often than we think. How many people have had experiences like these and never told anyone? How many people are walking around carrying these memories, these encounters with the impossible, because they know no one would believe them? The thread asked if anyone had an experience that changed their worldview, and the answer was yes, many people, more than you'd think. The world is stranger than we pretend it is, and some people have seen behind the curtain. They've seen the things we're not supposed to see, and they can never unsee them. Whether it's a skull in a lake where thousands died, or words from a goddess in a language you never learned, or a light that has no source, or dreams that show you betrayals before they happen, or a figure that watches children sleep. These things are out there. These experiences are happening, and the people they happen to are left with a choice. Keep it to themselves and let people think they're crazy, or share it anonymously on a forum at 3 a.m. and hope that someone, anyone, will believe them. Will say me too. Will say you're not alone. Will say I've seen it too. That's what this thread became. A place where people could finally share what they'd been holding inside, where they could admit that yes, something happened that changed everything, where they could find others who understood that the world is not what we've been told it is. And once you know that, once you really know it in your bones, you can never go back to the comfortable ignorance of before. You're awake now. You've seen too much. And all you can do is carry that knowledge and watch the world with different eyes. Eyes that know what's really out there in the dark. February 10th, 2017. Someone logged onto the paranormal board of Forshan with a question that seemed simple enough. They remembered seeing a thread a few years back about someone who found their grandpa's old bunker. But this wasn't just any bunker. When they got inside, they realized it wasn't a bunker at all. It was an ossuary. Now, if you don't know what an ossuary is, it's basically a room or a chamber filled with human bones. Sometimes they're organized, stacked neatly, skulls arranged in rows. Sometimes they're just piled up. Hundreds of skeletons all stored in one place. The kind of thing you'd find under old European churches or in ancient catacombs. Not the kind of thing you'd expect to find in your grandfather's property. The person asking the question said the original poster had included coordinates in the top left corner of their image, the exact location of this bone-filled chamber. But the image quality was terrible, and they couldn't read the numbers. So they asked if anyone remembered the thread, if anyone had saved a better quality version, if anyone knew where this place actually was. Think about that for a second. Someone's grandfather had access to an ossuary, a room full of human remains, and apparently he built or modified it to look like a bunker from the outside. Why would you do that? Why would you have something like that on your property? Where did all those bones come from? The thread got a few responses. Someone bumped it, hoping to keep it visible long enough for someone with answers to show up. Then someone else came in and just said it was fake, called the original poster a slur, and dismissed the whole thing. Because that's how these conversations always go on Forshan. Someone shares something disturbing, and immediately, half the replies are people saying, it's not real. But then someone else pushed back. They pointed out that just because one random person says it's fake, doesn't mean it actually is. And that's when things got interesting. Because someone brought up another legendary thread from the paranormal board. They said, remember when that guy came back from Paris with a skull from the catacombs just so he could have sex with it? Now that was a real thread. It actually happened. Someone went to the Paris catacombs, those underground tunnels lined with millions of human skeletons, and they stole a skull. They brought it home, and they posted about what they did with it. The thread became infamous. People still talk about it years later. Someone else replied to that mention and said it was a legendary thread. They even gave the skull a backstory. Poor Frenchie, they called him. Some French person who died centuries ago had their skull placed in the catacombs with thousands of others, and then got kidnapped just to be violated by a bored teenager. They made it sound almost tragic in a twisted way. Another person agreed, said that thread was amazing. Then they mentioned another one, the ghost puncher thread, because apparently there was also a thread where someone claimed they punched a ghost. These stories become part of the board's history. They get referenced over and over. And finally, someone else said they hadn't seen the ossuary thread posted in a long time, which suggests they remembered it, which suggests it was real enough that multiple people saw it when it first went up. So what actually happened here? Did someone really find a room full of human bones hidden on their grandfather's property? Did they really post coordinates showing exactly where it was? And if they did, what happened when people went looking for it? Think about the implications. If your grandfather had an ossuary on his property, that means he either built it or knew about it. That means he had access to human remains, lots of them. Where did they come from? Were they moved from somewhere else? Were they bought? Stolen from graveyards? Or is there a darker possibility? And why make it look like a bunker? Was it to hide what was really inside? Was it so neighbors or family members wouldn't ask too many questions? A bunker makes sense, especially for someone from the generation that lived through the Cold War. But an ossuary? That needs explaining. The person who found it must have been expecting supplies, maybe old weapons, canned food, water storage, the things you'd actually keep in a bunker. Instead, they opened the door and found bones. Human bones, piled up or arranged in rows, skulls staring back at them, the smell of old death and decay. Did they take pictures before they posted? Did they go inside and explore? Did they touch anything? And most importantly, did they call the police? Or did they just post about it online and ask for advice from strangers on an anonymous message board? The fact that coordinates were included suggests the original poster either wanted people to verify their story, or they were concerned about what they found and wanted authorities to know about it without directly reporting it themselves. Or maybe they just wanted to share something creepy and didn't think about the consequences. But now those coordinates are lost. The image quality degraded over time, or maybe it was always bad. The original thread probably got deleted after it archived, and whoever found that ossuary either never followed up or posted updates in threads that also got lost. People on the paranormal board love this kind of mystery. Real or fake, it doesn't matter as much as the story itself. The idea that someone's grandfather had a secret bone chamber. The idea that there might be coordinates out there, pointing to a place filled with human remains that nobody official knows about. The idea that you could go there if you just had better image quality. Some people think the whole thing was creative writing, an elaborate story designed to creep people out and get replies. Others think it was real, but exaggerated. Maybe it was a small collection, not a full ossuary. Maybe it was animal bones, not human. Maybe the grandfather was a doctor or an anthropologist and had a legitimate reason for keeping specimens. But some people believe it was exactly what the poster said it was. A hidden chamber full of human skeletons. A secret that stayed buried until someone stumbled across it and decided the first thing they should do was tell 4chan about it. The paranormal board has a weird relationship with truth. Half the posts are obvious fiction. People writing short horror stories and pretending they're real experiences. But then, every once in a while, something genuinely strange gets posted. Something that makes you wonder. Something that feels too specific and too weird to be made up. The ossuary thread might have been one of those. Or it might have been someone who spent 15 minutes writing a creepy scenario and watching people react. There's no way to know now. The coordinates are unreadable. The original poster never came back. The thread is gone. But it left an impression. Years later, people still remembered it, still brought it up, still wondered if those coordinates were real and what someone would find if they actually went there. And that's the thing about these stories. They stick with you. Even if you think they're fake, even if you're sure they're just creative writing, there's a part of your brain that wonders, what if it was real? What if there really is an ossuary hidden somewhere, disguised as a bunker, filled with bones that nobody can explain? What if those coordinates pointed to something that should have stayed hidden? And what if the reason the image quality was so bad wasn't an accident? What if someone didn't want those coordinates to be clear? What if even the original poster had second thoughts after posting them and deliberately made sure nobody could read them clearly? Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it was just a hoax. Maybe the coordinates were fake from the start. Maybe there was never an ossuary at all. Maybe it was just another story on a board full of stories, designed to entertain and disturb in equal measure. But the people asking about it years later, the people who remembered the thread, they wanted to believe. They wanted those coordinates to be real. They wanted there to be a place they could point to and say, look, this actually happened. This wasn't just a story. Someone really did find their grandfather's secret bone chamber. The truth is probably boring. The truth is probably that someone made it up, posted a blurry image to make it seem more authentic, and moved on with their life while other people kept wondering. That's how most of these things end. But every once in a while, the truth is stranger than that. Every once in a while, someone posts something on 4chan that turns out to be real. Something disturbing. Something that makes you realize the internet isn't just a place for made-up stories. Sometimes it's where people go when they don't know what else to do with what they've discovered. Maybe the ossuary was real. Maybe somewhere there's a bunker that isn't a bunker. Maybe someone's grandfather really did have a room full of bones, and nobody ever questioned it until after he was gone. Maybe those coordinates existed, and maybe they pointed to something that would have raised a lot of uncomfortable questions. We'll probably never know. The image is too blurry. The thread is too old. The people who might have known the answer are long gone from the conversation. All that's left is the memory of a post, a question about coordinates, and the nagging possibility that somewhere out there is a hidden ossuary that nobody was ever supposed to find. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe some mysteries are better left unsolved. Maybe some coordinates are better left unreadable. Maybe some of your grandfather's secrets should stay buried, along with whatever else is down there in the dark. What makes this story particularly unsettling is the casual way it was presented, like someone stumbling across their grandfather's old fishing gear, or a collection of vintage tools. Except instead of finding something nostalgic or valuable, they found something that should have prompted immediate police involvement, but instead became just another curiosity to share with strangers on the internet. The disconnect between the gravity of discovering human remains and the almost casual way it was discussed in that thread speaks to something deeply strange about internet culture, where the most disturbing discoveries can be treated like entertainment, where people are more interested in getting the coordinates to satisfy their own curiosity than they are in questioning why those bones were there in the first place, or whose families might still be wondering what happened to their loved ones. And when you think about the timeline involved here, you start to realize just how many people might have seen that original thread when it was first posted, how many people might have saved that image, how many people might have actually tried to read those coordinates and failed, and how many people might have succeeded but never said anything about what they found, because that's the other possibility that nobody really talks about. What if someone did read the coordinates? What if they went there? What if they found exactly what the original poster described, and they decided that some things are better left unreported, that some discoveries are too complicated to explain to authorities without raising more questions than answers? The internet is filled with these kinds of dangling threads, stories that start with a shocking revelation and end with nothing but speculation and fading memories, breadcrumbs that lead nowhere because the trail went cold, or because someone decided to stop leaving clues. The ossuary thread is just one example among thousands, but it's the kind that sticks with people because it touches on something primal. The idea that the people we think we know, even our own family members, might have secrets so dark that they literally bury them underground and disguise them as something innocent. The idea that you could inherit not just property or possessions, but mysteries that were never meant to be solved, questions that were supposed to die with the person who created them. On August 20th, 2013, an anonymous user posted something on 4chan's paranormal board that would haunt readers for years. He started by sharing a simple map of his cousin's property: green for forest, yellow for grassy areas, a house on a hill with brown paths winding through. He made one thing absolutely clear from the beginning. After what happened there, he was never going back. The story began when he was 23 years old. His cousin Luke called him out of nowhere, inviting him to visit the family property in the country. It was a place he hadn't been to in over a decade, not since he was 12. He used to spend every single summer there as a kid, swimming in the lake, exploring the thick forests that surrounded everything. But when he turned 12, the visits just stopped. Every time he asked his mom if he could go back, she'd give him the same answer. No. No explanation, no reason, just a flat refusal. Eventually, he stopped asking. But now his cousin was reaching out, saying he hadn't seen him in forever and that he should come visit. Luke's parents were away on a cruise in the Caribbean, and he was house-sitting. Luke told him he could bring a couple friends if he wanted, and that he'd be inviting some of his own friends too. The poster figured why not. He brought along his buddies Mark and Aiden, and when they arrived around 1 PM, they met Luke and his 5 friends: Chris, Mary, Henry, Jesse, and Jasper. 8 people total. They were greeted with weed and beer the moment they walked in. Everyone seemed cool and laid back. They unpacked their stuff and headed straight to the lake to swim. The property was beautiful. Luke had a water trampoline out on the lake, and even a paddle boat. They spent the whole afternoon messing around in the water, drinking, enjoying the summer day. But while he was swimming, the poster started getting this uncomfortable feeling, like someone was watching him from the trees. He tried to shake it off and just focus on having a good time. They stayed at the lake until around 6 in the evening, when Luke suddenly told everyone it was time to head back to the house. They all complained, calling him a party pooper, but Luke was insistent. They went inside and ate pasta for dinner. By 7 o'clock, the sun was starting to set, and the poster wanted to enjoy the beautiful summer night. He grabbed a six-pack and told everyone he was going outside. Luke immediately looked nervous, warning him about bears that sometimes came close to the house. The poster said he'd just come back inside if that happened, but Luke still seemed worried before finally letting him go. After a while, Luke came outside too, and he was carrying a gun. The poster had grown up in the suburbs and had never even touched a real gun before. When he asked why Luke needed it, Luke just said it was in case something happened. They sat outside together as the sun disappeared and darkness crept in. That's when Luke insisted they go back inside. The poster noticed something strange when Luke locked the door behind them. There was this massive deadbolt, unreasonably huge, plus 3 other smaller locks on the door. He figured maybe they were just really security conscious and didn't think much more about it. Upstairs, everyone was watching a movie and smoking weed. The poster sat down next to Mary, who he thought was attractive, and they started chatting. She was drunk and high and pretty cool to talk to. After a while, she suggested they go somewhere quieter, so they went to a bedroom on the first floor. Things started getting physical. They were making out, she had her shirt off, and then suddenly, she just froze. He asked what was wrong, but she didn't answer. She was staring behind him, looking for something. Then she let out the loudest scream he'd ever heard in his life, and ran out of the room, still topless. He turned around to see what had scared her. Nothing. Absolutely nothing there. He grabbed her shirt and bra and followed her out into the living room, where she'd curled up in the fetal position. Everyone came running downstairs asking what happened. For a few minutes, she wouldn't speak. Some people started accusing the poster of doing something to her, which he immediately denied. Finally, she started talking, and what she said cleared his name, but also completely ruined everyone's night. She explained that while they were hooking up, she'd looked out the window and thought she saw something, but with the light on inside, it was hard to see clearly. Then suddenly, someone's face appeared right up against the glass, except the face was all wrong. The eyes were sunken deep into the skull. The nose looked broken and mangled. The mouth was just hanging open, crooked, like the jaw was dislocated. Everyone went quiet, listening to her describe this thing. Some people thought she was joking, or that it was just the poster's reflection in the window. But Mary snapped at them. "I'm being fucking serious right now. I know what I saw." The whole time, Luke hadn't said a word. He was just quiet, listening. When the poster asked what he thought about it, Luke simply said they shouldn't worry about it. But the poster could tell Luke was lying. He knew something. Mary eventually calmed down after getting angry that people weren't taking her seriously. They all decided to sleep upstairs in the big room with the TV. Mary left early the next morning in her own car. The rest of the night was uneventful. Day 2 started normally enough. They ate breakfast and went on a morning hike with everyone except Mary. They smoked a little weed and headed back, though the poster felt paranoid the entire time, like eyes were following them through the trees. When they got back, they started swimming again. While sitting on the water trampoline, the poster looked out toward the forest and saw someone standing there among the trees. They were far enough away that he couldn't make out who it was, so he waved. The figure waved back, but the movement was strange, sluggish and slow, almost like it was happening in slow motion. He looked back at his group. There were only 5 of them at the lake. Him, Aiden, Luke, Mark, and Chris. Everyone else had gone back to the house to smoke. He assumed it must be one of them waving from the woods. But when he looked back at the trees, the figure was gone. Then suddenly, everyone who'd been inside appeared, walking down to the lake. He asked them how they'd gotten around to the forest so fast. They looked confused, saying they'd been inside the house eating the whole time. He insisted he'd just waved at someone in the woods. "Dude, what are you talking about? We've all been inside." That's when Luke's expression changed. He looked worried, genuinely worried. He stared out at the forest like he knew exactly what was happening, but didn't want to say it out loud. The poster was officially freaked out now. He got off the water trampoline and asked Luke what was going on. Luke just said, "Not right now. I'll tell you later." It was around 6 or 7 in the evening when things really went wrong. Chris, Henry, and Jesse had walked out to the shed to grab a shovel because they wanted to dig a fire pit for the night. They'd been gone for a while when suddenly a screech pierced through the air from the direction of the forest. Then more screeches, overlapping, coming from everywhere. Luke's face went pale. He told everyone to get inside the house immediately, right now. They all scrambled inside, asking what the hell was going on. Luke didn't answer at first. He was muttering to himself, "They aren't supposed to come out during the day. They're breaking the rules." Then came the pounding on the door. Chris was on the other side, screaming at the top of his lungs for them to open it. Luke threw the door open, and Chris burst inside, looking terrified. Luke immediately asked where Henry and Jesse were. Chris said he didn't know, that they'd gotten separated and these things had started chasing him. Luke didn't waste any time. He ran through the house, locking every single door and window, closing all the shutters. They all rushed upstairs and looked out the window down toward the lake. What they saw made the poster's blood run cold. There were dozens of figures near the edge of the woods, and they weren't walking normally. They were jittering, twitching, moving like they were having seizures while trying to walk. More of them stood perfectly still near the shed, just watching. Then Aiden said, "What the fuck?" and pointed down at the path. Henry and Jesse were walking up toward the house, moving slowly like nothing was wrong. They walked right up to the front door and started knocking. Someone asked if they should let them in. The knocking continued, steady and rhythmic. Luke stood there for a moment, and the poster could tell by his face that Luke had seen something like this before. Finally, Luke spoke. "It isn't them." Everyone asked what he meant. The knocking was getting louder now, more forceful, like multiple hands pounding together. Luke's voice was firm. "That's not them. It looks like them, but it isn't. We need to fucking leave." They decided to wait until morning, but nobody slept that night. The knocking never stopped. It went on for hours and hours, accompanied by screeching from all directions in the forest. The sounds were constant, relentless, terrifying. Eventually, as morning approached, the screeching began to die down. The knocking faded to silence. But when the poster looked out the window above the front door, Henry and Jesse were still standing there, staring at the door. Then, as if they sensed him watching, they both slowly looked up. Their eyes were gone, just deep, empty sockets in their faces. Their jaws hung slack and loose. They stared directly at him, and even though there were no eyes, he could feel them looking into his soul. The sensation didn't go away, even after he stepped back from the window. He knew that feeling, that stare, would stay with him forever. Around 9 in the morning, Luke decided it was time to run for it. He grabbed his gun and handed out golf clubs to everyone else. His instructions were simple. "We're all going to run to the cars. Don't look around, just go." He told the poster to drive the Range Rover while Chris would drive the sedan. Once everyone knew which car they were getting into, they all gathered by the back door. Luke cracked it open, looked around quickly, then bolted toward the vehicles. Everyone followed, running as fast as they could. That's when the poster saw Henry and Jesse again. They were running after the group, except it wasn't running. They were sliding across the grass while standing upright, moving like puppets being pulled on strings. Jasper refused to get in the car, saying he didn't want to leave them behind. Luke didn't hesitate. He punched Jasper in the face and physically threw him into the passenger seat of the sedan. The engine started, and they peeled out of there, with Henry and Jesse still chasing behind them. The screeching started up again, coming from everywhere at once. It was so loud, it nearly drowned out the sound of the engines. The poster described it as what he imagined a man-bat would sound like if such a thing existed. As they sped down the road away from the property, he kept seeing figures standing at the edge of the forest, and occasionally he'd catch glimpses of their faces. They were exactly what Mary had described that first night. Deformed, wrong, improper. Sunken eyes, broken noses, jaws hanging open at wrong angles. Their shoulders were lopsided, their posture crooked. Their legs looked broken and bent backwards like a grasshopper's. He kept seeing them until they finally left the forested area completely behind. He drove 90 miles per hour the entire way home. The poster never explained what Luke eventually told him, if anything. He never went into detail about what those things were, or why his mother had stopped letting him visit after he turned 12. But the implications were clear. Luke knew about them. His parents knew about them. That's why the door had so many locks. That's why Luke insisted everyone come inside before dark. That's why there were rules that the things in the forest had apparently broken by coming out during the day. Henry and Jesse were still out there somewhere, or at least something wearing their faces was. The poster ended his story with the simple truth that he would never forget those empty eye sockets staring up at him from the front door. He would never forget the sound of that screeching, or the way those things moved across the grass like broken marionettes. And he would absolutely never, ever go back to that property again. Whatever was in those woods, whatever had taken Henry and Jesse, it was still there, waiting